You are listening to the War on the Rocks podcast on strategy, defense, and foreign affairs. My name is Ryan Evans. I'm the founder of War on the Rocks. This is the first of a couple episodes I've recorded while visiting Austin, Texas. For this episode, I sat down with Dr. Casey Perley, who's the director of the Army Applications Laboratory. Hope you enjoyed the show. Thanks so much for sitting down with us today.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really glad you came to Austin.
Yeah, it's you have a beautiful view of the Texas State Capitol building. I'm staring right at it. You're lucky to have this office space. Although it's pretty cool how this building is designed in such a way that so many people have that view.
It really is fantastic. One of the things I joke about when anybody comes to visit us at AAL is like, this looks exactly like the Pentagon, right? You know, leather couches, standing desks, tons of windows, views of the Capitol. So we're really lucky to be here. And we are purposely designed to not look like your standard government office building. The view's just a perk.
Yes. Whereas in the Pentagon, you're in the basement or in an internal office and have no view of pretty much anything.
The decade before I came to AAL, I worked in biocontainment labs. I worked in biosafety level 3 and biosafety level 4 on things like tuberculosis and hemorrhagic fever viruses. So my first week in the lab, somebody asked me how I liked my new job, and I said, there's windows, because I'd spent a decade in labs that had no view of the outside.
Let's start with that. So you're a scientist by training. Tell me about that. What kind of a scientist are you? What drew you to science?
I am. I'm a biodefense scientist by training. I never remember a time in my life where I didn't like science. My parents used to joke that my career path was pretty obvious because when I was 3 years old, I wanted to bring my microscope to a tea party and not my stuffed animals. So, and I wanted to look at the tea under the microscope. So, I mean, that interest set early on. What really fascinates me are germs, specifically how germs can be so small and yet be so efficiently deadly and hijack our immune system in ways that we don't understand. So I went and did my undergraduate work in biophysics and biochemistry, and then I did my PhD in molecular genetics and microbiology. And what I really wanted to do was ask big questions. How does this germ make you sick? What is the first type of cell it infects? How can I prevent it? And we know a lot about that for germs that are easy to work with. But when you're talking hemorrhagic fevers or plague or tularemia, things that require a lot of engineering controls and personal protective equipment, we don't. So that led to my PhD and then my postdoc at the Army's Medical Research Institute of Infectious Diseases, doing animal models and vaccine design for emerging pathogens.
Which was a bit topical not too long ago.
It may have been.
So how did you end up joining the Army Applications Laboratory?
So two things. One, I loved my time at USAMRIID, but I watched...
At where, sorry?
USAMRIID, which is what we call the Army's Medical Research Institute of Infectious Diseases. It's at Fort Detrick in Maryland. Science moved slow. I mean, biology does that. And I wanted a little bit more immediacy and more diversity in my science, so I didn't spend decades making a vaccine, and then it gets into clinical trials, and maybe it doesn't go so well, which can happen. That's science. I'm also an Army wife, and my husband was coming down to Fort Cavazos, then Fort Hood, to take battalion command. So I needed a job in Texas. I heard Army Applications Lab had just stood up. I said, hey, diversity, immediacy in science, this sounds great. And I called them up, and I said, hey, I hear you guys are hiring. And they said, yeah, we want engineers. And I said, true, not an engineer, but if you ever want to experiment on a soldier, you're going to need somebody that can write an IRB and knows how to do ethics approvals.
Tell the audience what an IRB is.
It's Institutional Review Board.
Most of our audience is blissfully unaware of and never will have to know what an IRB is, for which I'm thankful. But yeah, tell them what that is.
It's an Institutional Review Board. So if you ever want to experiment with humans, you need ethics approvals, and getting through that IRB, that's a part of it.
They're like, we totally want to experiment on soldiers. You're our person.
Yes. And then I've done 0 IRBs in my 5 years at AAL. But hey, it worked. I'm here. When I joined the lab, I was on the tech team. I was a position that doesn't exist. I was our deputy tech director. And then through the years, I led our insights and analysis team, which does our tech and our corporate market research. I was our deputy director. And since May, I've been in the director's role.
How has the organization changed since you've joined it? I mean, you've basically been here for its entire history, right?
I started, I think, 6 months after it did. So yeah, we've changed in a couple of ways. I think at first we really didn't understand exactly what we wanted to do. We had university outreach as part of our mission. There was talk of maybe having a PIF as well, which is a prototype integration facility, think like a really big, cool makerspace. And we honed in on the fact that our mission is to expand the Army's outreach to the civil innovation base, so our country's academia and industry. And when you think about it, that's a real strategic advantage for the United States over near-peer competitors like Russia and China. So in focusing in on that, that really dialed us into the types of technology we're interested in terms of maturity levels. We're interested in things that are, maybe in pieces on your tabletop to min viable product. And we also really honed in on our business model, which involves, we call it soldier integrated design. So that's repeated soldier touch points, ideally with the same unit, so that we can recreate that go-to-market style feedback strategy companies get in the corporate world, where they're constantly taking a beta product out to a consumer, testing it, getting feedback, coming in, reiterating, and going back out.
So in some ways, you perform a lot of the same functions for the Army that AFWERX does for the Air Force, but I know it's a different relationship. Your Futures Command's innovation organization, and your organization has also sort of grown up with Futures Command.
Exactly right. And I think one of the great things about being here in Austin is that AFWERX is our neighbor. They're just across the hall. Defense Innovation Unit's here. Naval X, the Navy's innovation unit, is here. TMDX, which is Texas Military Department, so our National Guard in Texas, their innovation unit's here. ArcWorks is here. So when AAL stood up, DIU and AFWERX were already here. We could learn lessons from them. And then as we've gotten this, the rest of this great ecosystem has been joining us here in the Capital Factory in Austin. It's just created great collaboration.
So a lot of our listeners are service members, and a lot of those are soldiers. Why should soldiers care about what AAL, what your organization does? Why does it matter to them?
That's such a great question. So the other part of AAL's mission, in addition to expanding, the Army's access to industry and academia and the civil innovation base, is to get the best technology in the hands of warfighters possible. Some of those technologies are going to be things that what I like to call the institutional Army, our TRADOC commander, Army Materiel commander, our friends over in ASALT, who I like to call the buyers or the acquirers of things for the Army. They have gaps. We can help close them. But some of our problems come directly from soldiers, issues that they've seen on the ground, things that would help them. And
can you give us an example of something that you're allowed to talk about that you're working on that would help soldiers?
Absolutely. So back in the early days of AAL, we went and we did a soldier sensing session at then Fort Hood, now Fort Cavazos. And we had a private say, when I take my car to the mechanic puts on a heads-up display and has like an AR/VR walkthrough of maintenance procedures to follow.
This soldier is a much better mechanic than I do.
I know, me too. Apparently it's true for there's certain types of cars that have this.
Okay.
I would like that to help me PMCS my vehicles because I'm new. I don't get a lot of time to practice. I'm worried I'm going to screw up and destroy the vehicle or hurt myself. We also then had a battalion commander that said, I want paperless maintenance. So we fused those two problems together, and we're now working on a technology called Armors, which is a telemaintenance assistance tool that has AR/VR overlay. So that remote mechanic can help whoever is trying to do the service. That will ultimately feed into GCSSA to make parts ordering easier and provide dashboards to Echelon so they can see real-time maintenance status of vehicles.
And so I imagine this has training applications too, as well as real-world applications.
Absolutely. It's currently also we're having a master gunner application worked on in conjunction with the schoolhouse at Fort Moore.
Very cool.
Has some training implications.
Other members of our audience are in defense tech and in industry. Why does AAL matter to them?
I know working with the DoD is hard. It's not easy to know who to talk to. And a lot of times the requirements to compete for a solicitation the government puts out are really long and really confusing. And if you are a non-traditional business, regardless of size, one, time is money. So do you have enough things that you can push off to spend the amount of time to make that application? And also, do you even know how to navigate it? We try to break down those barriers for access. We try to be transparent about what the business case is for working with us. So about how many are we going to buy on about what time frame? To the extent we can say that publicly, we will. To the extent that for tech protect reasons we can't, we try to share that very early on in the project. So if a company needs to bow out, there's no hard feelings. And we try to move capital a lot quicker, which means that for the Army, we can start tech development work sooner. And for companies, you're not waiting and paying out of pocket to work with the DoD because it takes a month to be able to invoice for your first check, and then it's got to clear all the systems. So we're here just to try to break down those barriers, make it easier for the companies to come in, connect them with all the right stakeholders on the project, including who will buy it, who are the requirements writers, who are the scientists, so they don't have to do BD into the government.
I think that's really interesting. One of the interesting ways that you folks are approaching it is you're not in DC.
No.
You're in this pretty vibrant city of Austin, which is in some ways that are good, but also in some ways that are bad, I have to admit. It looks completely different from when I first started coming here about 12, 13, 14 years ago. But you're in the Capital Factory. So you mentioned some of the DoD organizations you're co-located with, but talk about some of the non-DoD organizations that you're co-located with as well and how that fits with what you're trying to accomplish here.
So Capital Factory is a really cool place. It is a co-working space for startups, and there is a venture capital arm associated with it. So we are surrounded every day by companies that are just forming or are in the early stages of their development. And when AAL stood up, all of that business model that I talked about was really informed by just conversations with companies we were having at the microwave, heating up our lunch, or at a Capital Factory hosted mixer type event. Being here has given us a sense of empathy for those companies, really helped us understand what their pain points are, and has helped connect us into the venture capital community, which is incredibly important. So about 60 years ago, 2/3 of R&D spending in this country was government money. Now only 20% is. And technologies that we increasingly need as an Army or as the DoD, things like robotics and cyber, are developing more rapidly in the commercial space than ever before. If we can figure out how to show return on investment to venture capitalists, make it worth their time to invest in defense tech, and if we can show them there is a path to growing a line of business into the Army by working with AAL, they're more likely to let their companies apply. And in doing that, we can leverage all of the great commercial sector money that's being pumped into these companies to, either get additional features on tech that the Army needs or leverage all the great work that they've done so we don't start from scratch.
I'd like to take a break from this conversation to tell you a bit more about some changes coming to our membership program. If you're already a member of the War on the Rocks Platinum program, you know that you get access to a slew of members-only podcasts, newsletters, the app, the War Hall, and we're adding some new podcasts coming up, including dedicated podcasts to each of the U.S. Armed Services. And if you're listening to this episode and you're interested in Army issues, I think you're really going to like the Army podcast. So check out what we have to offer at warontherocks.com/membership. And now back to my conversation with Dr. Perley. I asked this question having lived a very painful example of it with my other company, Bedrock, as have a lot of founders of dual-use and defense tech companies. It's great to work with these innovative cells and cells of innovation in the services, but eventually these companies have to graduate and go on to big Army, which is hard. In my case, Bedrock's case, it was the Air Force, because you have professionals that's still mission-driven, still trying to do the right thing, but have a more traditional way of looking at buying products. How do you, even though it's in some ways beyond your remit, but also necessary for AAL to be successful, how do you think about that as the director?
I remember I'd just taken over as director, and I was trying to codify AAL's mission and how we do business into a document that we could share with the lab, but also get it down on paper. And I had these great debates with Scott, our communications director, over just this thing. I kept saying the ultimate metric of success is what gets fielded to the soldier. AAL stops once it's a min-viable product. Then we've got to hand it over to our colleagues on the acquisition side of the house. We fundamentally have no control over what makes it through, what gets fielded, and ultimately then, even once it's fielded, what the soldiers use. But I also felt passionate that was part of our mission, because if we transition every project we work on and then they all die, or they all make it to a soldier and they don't use it, we fundamentally failed. So the tension is there. I have no great answers. I will say we always involve our acquisition partner up front at the beginning of our project. They help us write the solicitation. They help us in down select. They attend the monthly progress meetings or soldier touch points. So I think keeping them involved and helping the companies form a relationship with them, as appropriate, does help, but it does not eliminate all the barriers.
Is this a big topic of conversation with, you're co-located here with Cell of Defense Innovation Unit, AFWorks, so on and so forth?
Yes, it is a lot about what we talk about. I'm really excited to see the Defense Appropriations Bill, just got passed. And there
are... A little late, but yeah.
Literally, we've got it. It's here now. And there's funding for DIU to try to take some of these prototypes and really accelerate them into combatant commands. And I'm really looking forward to seeing if an approach like that might help eliminate some of these barriers that companies face once they're done with an AAL or an AFWorks or a Naval X. Is that the next logical stepping stone for them? And is that pathway then going to help prepare them more to work with, big DoD?
You have just come out 2 weeks ago. It was announced South by Southwest, the big, I'm not even sure how to define South by Southwest anymore, but we won't get into that. Big festival here in Austin that happens every year that's apparently related to all sorts of things now. But one of the things that the Army had a big presence at this year's South by Southwest, and you announced AAL's first annual report. So an annual report, you were telling me earlier, is a bit of a misnomer because it really covers the first 5 years, not just the last year. So tell me about that effort, why it's important, and what you're trying to accomplish with that.
We tried to accomplish a lot of things with that. I think drove my communications team a little bit batty. There were, for me, 3 main things. The first was I felt we owed all of our stakeholders. So that's Army, that's Congress, and that's the venture capital and business community. A real hard look at our numbers. Were we achieving the goals we set out? And nobody really defined success for us yet. So I just had to say, here's what we're doing. We think it's good. Do you guys agree? For us, the big metric this year was 45% of our projects do transition on post-AAL. Some go directly to units. Some go to our ASALT partners. Some have gone to other services. Some have gone to labs and centers for integration or further development. So multiple paths. But we've gotten a lot of projects to continue on post-AAL. Some of it is also that we've found companies in 33 states. So when you think of our mission to expand access to the civil innovation base, whether you're in Silicon Valley, New York, or Idaho, if you're the best company for a project, we are going to find you. We also really started a debate on what is ROI for military innovation. This is something that we and other innovation organizations have struggled with. I laid out our plan for how we're going to try to define that next year using business cases for all of our projects. And for us, we are defining ROI for the military as military utility of a technology for a given cost. A little bit different than how you define ROI in the commercial sector. And the last thing we wanted to do was just put out case studies and lessons learned. We always get asked for them, and we have like a document here, a document there. So we wanted to combine them all, put them out, and then say to everybody, all right, tell us how we're doing, tell us what we missed, tell us what you want to see, and then refine it for what we put out next year, because this will be an annual event at South by every year.
I know you're a very, partially, I would assume by your training as a scientist, you're a very data-driven, metrics-driven leader. What are some of the findings in putting together this annual report that surprised you once you put all the data together?
My team teased me a little bit about this, but one of the big things I did is I made us define our metrics before we calculated them so that we couldn't be biased.
How often does that happen in government? Probably not often. So I commend you for that.
It's the scientist in me. I was surprised at how high our transition rate was. Nobody's ever told me what the right number is. I feel like 45% is a little too high. One of the pieces of feedback we got is people want to know why things aren't transitioning. Are they not transitioning because the needs of the Army changed? Are they not transitioning because the technology didn't work? Or are they not transitioning because, I call it transition risk, issues in another part of a portfolio, ASALT went with a different vendor, whatever it is. So one of the things I'm interested in looking at next year is, are we taking enough technical risk in our portfolio, or are we playing it safe in terms of our investments? The other thing that surprised me is companies, since the time they've gotten on contract with AAL, have raised $933 million in VC investment. And for companies that had limited to no DoD experience, they've seen over a 50% increase on the VC funding they're raising after joining AAL's portfolio. For us, I think that begins to dispel the myth a little bit that working with DoD is a death knell for some commercial companies and is very unattractive to venture capitalists. And I was shocked at how much these companies had raised. I was really excited to see it.
What would you say to founders or aspiring founders that are a little intimidated, which all founders are, even if most wouldn't, or perhaps in some cases shouldn't admit it, by the prospect of raising money? Because one of the things I worry about is in this ecosystem, VC money is a little overvalued, and especially priced rounds. So, the way it used to work, I'm not sure if it's still this way, but with Cyber 2s, with AFWorks, you had to raise money in a priced round to get that extra matching money. So basically you get more money if you're able to raise money, but it has to be a priced round, which for those of you who don't work in this world, it means that you have to basically peg a valuation to your company and raise money on that basis, which can be hard if you're a new company or pre-revenue company. So there's other vehicles like convertible notes that a lot of early stage companies are more able to get, which don't involve pegging an exact price to your company. But a lot of these DoD innovation shops, I'm not sure about yours, but it's sort of the questions heading, won't recognize that as in the same way they recognize venture funding and price rounds in particular. What do you say to that?
AAL does use SBIR dollars. We also use RDT&E dollars. We do take advantage of the SBIR ability to match funds that companies bring in, but we don't care. Where they're from is not quite the right way of saying it. Like if they come from Russia, we definitely care. But we don't care if it's IRAD dollars. We don't care if it's a convertible note. We don't care if it's a priced round. For us, because we're typically working with companies whose technology is slightly earlier in the game than, say, DIU, a lot of our companies have not raised money by the time they've joined our portfolio, or they've maybe raised a seed round.
Yeah, from a few angels.
From a few angel investors. So, we don't want to push companies into a bad business decision because they need a certain type of raise or a certain type of money.
Well, and also raising money from VC is a relationships-based business, and someone might be a great founder with great technology and a great idea, but not have those relationships to raise money from venture.
Agreed. So every quarter, we do a portfolio review in AAL where we go through by project, how are things going, and then to a company level. And all of our project managers ask the companies, when it's coming time to prepare that, are you raising? Are you thinking about raising? Because we have a network of a couple hundred VCs who are interested either in investing in dual use or defense tech, or who are interested in investing power and energy. And, we have those types of projects. And we'll make warm connections between a company and an investor, either directly or through like a venture capital speed dating event that we have. And then obviously as the government, we have to step back and it's a business to business relationship from there. But we try to make those connections when appropriate because it does help us, the Army, and it helps the companies as well.
This week in Washington, back where I just flew in from, professional staff members on the Armed Services Committees are working with members and others to put in placeholders for things that might end up in the National Defense Authorization Act. What are some things, aside from exact funding amounts and more money or whatever, I'm sure you wouldn't ask for less money, but what would you like these staff members and legislative staffers working in members' offices working on these issues to be looking at for the next NDAA?
So in the last appropriations bill that was passed a couple weeks ago, they gave DIU about $589 million, I think, in funds designed to help transition technology. Normally, when Congress allocates money to something, there's a specific color associated with it that tells the government, you need to be doing this stage research on this type of thing with the money.
Or if it's for research and development, or if it's for operations and maintenance. Yeah.
Or if it's for procurement. This year, they put all three of those types of money in one line or on one form to give DIU maximum flexibility to accelerate technology into combatant commands. So this money could theoretically be used to do some testing and a little bit of final development. It could be used to buy. It could be used to sustain something. I'm really interested to see how that works. I also know it's going to take more than a year to see results. So I hope we see continued commitment to that experiment. And giving the defense community the time to figure out how to use it, figure out how to manage it so Congress still has their well-deserved oversight, and really evaluate how effective it is. I think it's going to be very effective at speeding things into the hands of our warfighters.
Last question. I'd love to know about a book that had a big influence on you at some point in your life. And it doesn't have to be about the military. It can be about anything, but just a book that sticks with you that has made you a different kind of person or professional having read it.
I'm going to give you two. The first is The Hot Zone. I read that book the summer before my senior year of college at the recommendation of one of my history of science professors. And it changed my life.
What's The Hot Zone? I haven't read this.
So The Hot Zone is a book about when Ebola, luckily a strain of Ebola that does not infect humans and only infects monkeys, came to Reston, Virginia in the 1980s.
Oh, they made the Dustin Hoffman movie out of it, right?
I think they did.
Yeah.
That is
a highly fictionalized version of it, yeah.
Whether the book is a completely accurate representation or there's some fictionalization has been the subject of debate. But that is the book that
the movie at least was highly fictionalized.
I'm sure. I haven't seen the movie.
I don't know about the book.
That's the book that made me want to go into infectious disease, specifically zoonotic pathogens, and radically changed the course of my life from being a cancer researcher. So there's that one. I also love Freedom's Forge. I don't know if you've read that one. It's a great book that looks at industrial mobilization around World War II and lays out just what was required to get the auto manufacturers converted to war production, how to increase ship production. But what I really took away from that book was the public-private partnerships between the DoD and industry that in some cases might have atrophied over the last couple of decades, but how even small businesses making adding machines, the government was finding ways for them to pivot their product and contribute to the war effort. And I think there's so much in there that the defense innovation community can take away in terms of lessons learned and things we should be looking for as we move forward.
Great. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the War on the Rocks podcast. Don't forget to check out our membership program at warontherocks.com/membership. Stay safe and stay healthy.